Assalamu alaikum and peace be with you. You're welcome to this program, a series on Muslim relations with Christians, Jews, and others. In this episode, we will be looking at certain commonly misinterpreted verses of the Quran that are used by some to undermine peaceful coexistence, to justify hostility, to counter the arguments of those who say it has been part of the Sunnah and teachings of Islam to build with people of other faiths, to give gifts, to accept, to visit, and have friendly relations. I am your host, Muhammad Nuruddin Lemu, and with me to discuss this issue are two of our distinguished facilitators, Brother Muhammad Jamil and Brother Ibrahim Bello. Once again, you're most welcome to the program. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
I'd like to start with Brother Ibrahim Bello. We have in the Quran, in a number of verses in Baqarah and Al-Imran and Surah An-Nisa, a couple of others, verses that are understood by some to say something different. These are usually translated as Muslims should not take non-Muslims as friends, or Muslims should not take disbelievers as friends. So we have in Surah Al-Imran in chapter 3 verse 28 where Allah is saying that let those who believe not take those who deny truth or kafirun as friends. And it usually stops there. And the word awliya is translated as friends. Is this lost in translation a problem? Because if you say you can't be friends, then of course you just say, so how did you justify even going as far as getting married and all the other things we've been discussing over the last couple of episodes? What would you say on this?
Yeah, it is true. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in Quran chapter 2 verse 3 verse 1 verse 28 that لا يتخذ المؤمنون الكافرين أولياء من دون المؤمنين, meaning let not believers take those who disbelieve, who deny the truth, as their allies, as their guardians, in preference to believers. Now, you don't need to go further. The thing is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking of a situation where the interest of Islam and the interest of non-Muslims is at stake. Okay? So nobody will partner with the non-Muslims at that instance, except somebody, of course, who is not a true Muslim.
Yeah, so where there's a conflict in the
Conflict
values.
on the values. Except somebody who is truly not a Muslim right inside him. And it's interesting that those verses were actually revealed in Medina, and they are mostly related to cases of the betrayal and the treacherous act of the Jew and the Munafiqun. Because usually Munafiqun were the ones that connived with the Jew when the Prophet came to Medina.
So these are the Muslim hypocrites.
Yes, Muslim
conniving
hypocrites.
with those Jews that
Yes.
were treacherous.
So Allah was warning, or is warning Muslims not to do that, because they were among Muslims who were taking side with the Jew. And even when the interest of Islam is at stake, they will still side with the Jew. So this is where Allah say min duni. It means you have two interests clashing. Where the interest of the deniers of truth is against the ethics and the values of Islam, then no Muslim shall do that except a hypocrite. So it is not saying you can relate to them, you can be their friends, you've been good neighbors. The Prophet has been good neighbors with them. They stay peacefully in Medina, and a number of other historical contexts prove otherwise. So the verse should not be taken in isolation and without looking at the context. And more so, the wordings of the verse is very clear. He say min dunil mu'minin. Okay? In preference to believers. So the verse should not be taken in isolation, and it has to do with context, where interest of Islam is at stake. Morally, nobody will at that time side with the opposition. Sorry to use that word, this time around, the deniers of faith, of truth, when you actually claim to be a Muslim, except you have some doubt about your faith. Yes.
What have scholars said on this?
A classical scholar of Tafsir, Ibn Kathir, made comments on this verse in his Tafsir al-Quran al-Azim, and said this verse, لا يتخذ المؤمنين الكافرين أولياء, is just as similar as the same verse, another verse in the Quran. That's Quran chapter 60, Surah Al-Mumtahana. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تتخذوا عدوي وعدوكم أولياء إن استحبوا الكفر على الإيمان. So here, that time again, do not take non-Muslims, deniers of truth, as ally. He now said, this verse is not in any way prohibiting friendliness. He's not in any way prohibiting or even discouraging marriage or exchange of visits between Muslim and non-Muslim, or gestures and kindness to them. Because like in the second chapter where I quoted, that's Quran chapter 60, Allah in that same verse says, لا ينهاكم الله عن الذين لم يقاتلوكم في الدين وأخرجوكم من دياركم أن تبروهم وتقسطوا إليهم إنما ينهاكم الله عن الذين قاتلوكم في دينكم وأخرجوكم من دياركم أن تبروهم وتقسطوا. So Allah is clear about it is not about denying you. Allah did not forbid you from being kind, good, and friendly to those non-Muslims who are not hostile, who are not chasing you on the account of your deen out of your houses. Thus that Allah says you should not be peaceful, you should not relate with kindness with those who fight you on the cause of your deen, those who send you out of your houses on the cause of your deen, those you don't have. So if Allah Ta'ala, and of course Ma'idah also as acknowledge and establish marriage between Muslim and Ahlul Kitab. So he said this verse therefore is not stopping that. But what the verse is saying is that you do not side with them, like Mal Ibrahim said, such that you turn a hypocrite. This is there's a conflict of interest between the interests of Islam and interests of the non-Muslim. Then you take side with the non-Muslim against the interests of Islam. That is what the verse is saying. It is also letting us know that there shouldn't be any way that you will even make preference of the community of the deniers of faith against the interests of the community of acceptance of those who accepted faith. Now you can see here it's not only Islam itself, but where this Muslim interest, this is an of Muslim interest will surely suit the Sharia interest. Then this is the interest of the Sharia, and this is the interest of those who are against the Sharia. You do not side, because Sharia is about promotion of good and taking away harm. So whatever Sharia supports is that thing that will bring good to humanity. So you do not become somebody who is aiding destruction of the humanity. But it's not in any way negating peace building, because even after this verse, Prophet ﷺ continued to live peacefully, continued to relate with people without any segregation as such because of your faith. It is only because of what you do or what you say that is against the injunctions of Islam that you are given that. So it's also warning us that we should not compromise Islamic values in acceptance of the values of other faiths, because you as Muslim, your values are that values of Islam. Of course, the values in Islam are virtues. So those virtues are what you should uphold. Do not go to any other thing that will negate virtues. Allahu Alam.
Yeah, just to add, Imam Tabari, while commenting on the meaning of this verse, said, whosoever is loyal to Jew and Christians against Islam and Muslims is actually one of them. And that no one will do that except if he is content with what they do. And in such case, he becomes enemy of Islam and Muslims. And similar judgment that is passed on the Jew and Christians in that regard applies to him too. So in other words, it's always about conflict of interest. And most of these things are usually not under normal circumstance. It's when you have a murky situation where there is tension, there is hostility. Ordinarily, Jew and Christians coexisted earlier on peacefully with Islam, Muslims and Islam. Nobody has problem. So these are in those difficult situations and abnormal situations.
So I think, from what you are both saying, is this verse of the Quran doesn't conflict with anything else in the Quran. It's just to understand its context and who it is addressing. As classical scholars, you've quoted Ibn Kathir, Imam at-Tabari, are saying this verse is talking about where there's a conflict of interest between the virtues and the values of the believers and the interests of Muslims and vices of others, that hypocrites would go with others and be against their own. And so it is to this audience that the verse of the Quran is being addressed. Not every Muslim, you cannot be friends, you cannot have alliances, you cannot marry, etc. Scholars didn't understand that. And I think this is part of the problem with taking a verse in isolation without looking at what do scholars say on this and how does it harmonize with other relevant verses in the Quran and especially also the Sunnah, how the Prophet put it in practice. The other verse, again, may be very similar in Surah An-Nisa, chapter 4, verse 139, along similar lines, saying that believers should not take these people, deniers of truth, some would just generally just say non-Muslims, as friends to be honored by them. Is this saying you can't be honored by non-Muslims? Is it saying you can't do anything for which even a non-Muslim says, well done? The Prophet was called Al-Amin by non-Muslims. So is this in any way saying don't be friends with people of other faiths?
Yes, Quran chapter 4, that's Surah An-Nisa verse 139. Allah Ta'ala said, الذين يتخذون الكافرون أولياء من دون المؤمنين أيبتغون عندهم العزة فإن العزة لله جميعا. As for those who hold on to deniers of truth as ally, do they seek honor or prestige from them? Yeah, honor and prestige lies with Allah in its totality. Of course, this is not different from the verse we have talked about. It has similar comments by scholars, and it is also we should also note that we will not hold any verse in isolation and especially taking it out of the context where there is no conflict of interest between the interest of Islam or Muslim and that of the non-Muslim. This verse does not apply. It is where there is conflict that you begin to look at it. And it is not also talking about just having a relationship that is based on maybe social transaction or no, but if it's about moral issues. Moral issues are religious rights. So if any religious rights, there is context between the religious right of the Muslim and that of the non-Muslim, then you do not take side with the non-Muslim against that of the Muslims if you are a Muslim. And you see, like we said in the past, most of these verses were addressing the hypocrites among the Muslims who were taking side and undermining the Islam and the Muslims. So we should be very, very wary when we take verses. Sometimes what you do is look at verses before it and verses after it. You will see the context clearly and you will know where it applies. It's also worthy of note that like Muhammad Asad, talked about this verse, and I said it is also telling us that we should stop imitating their ways of worship in preference to our own way of worship. We do not take it that, oh, theirs is better. No. If you are a Muslim, then there is no better way of worship, of devotion than the one Islam has prescribed for you. If you are not a Muslim, then you have your own. You have your own. But if you are a Muslim, that is what you should take. So this again is telling us all, like I said, is about morality, not about social or political alliance, because political alliances continue even after the Prophet ﷺ. You will have alliances built by the caliphs with non-Muslim politically, because like you know, that time it was the period of conquest. Everybody want to conquer the other person, so you have to build alliances to build a strong network that would deter anybody coming to take over your land and your people. Allah.
And Malam Ibrahim, what would you add
just
to
like
this?
he said, Imam al-Qurtubi actually asserted that The verse refers to hypocrites who connive with the non-Muslims against the interests of Islam, just to win their love and support. So the verse is actually not saying Muslims should not relate or tolerate or live peacefully or engage in any peace-building activity with non-Muslims. You just say don't connive and don't compromise the interests or your moral values just to win their support. So verses like this are also telling Muslims to avoid compromising in any way. Once it comes to issues of values and norms, there is a limit. As much as Islam encourages peaceful coexistence, peace building, but not at the expense of your religious value. So this is the implication of the verse.
So when these verses of the Quran say you should not take people of other faiths as awliya, from what I'm understanding is the word wali, as we know in Arabic. It has a very
broad meaning.
Yeah.
Yes, wali could mean guardian, it could mean protector, it could mean ally, partner. So it depends on the context that dictates this. So this issue of awliya, don't seek their protection. Don't seek their support don't seek to win their love against the interests of Islam. This is what it means.
So it's more a moral alliance.
Yes.
In other words, where there is a disagreement between the virtues or the values of Islam and those that conflict with from other religious communities, you don't have a moral alliance with their own in preference to or against your own, which I think clearly makes it obvious, as you've mentioned, both in the tafsir of Ibn Kathir, Qurtubi, these classical scholars, and Imam at-Tabari, that this, looking at the context, is not talking about don't be friends with, do not have alliances, it's not even saying you can't be protected by, as we found in Abyssinia, Muslims getting protection and the non-Muslims, but this issue of moral alliance in preference to the way of the believers. There's another verse that is commonly quoted in Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter 2, verse 120, where the translation as it is given is never will the Jews and Christians be satisfied with you until you follow their ways. The understanding given by some is whatever you do when it comes to interfaith bridge building, others will never be satisfied with you. They will never live peacefully with you. They will never accept you for you who you are. Meanwhile, when people interpret it that way, in everyday life, you actually find some non-Muslims who are not just satisfied with Islam and Muslims, but they even become Muslims. So you have those. You have those who are satisfied with Islam enough to respect it and protect the rights of Muslims and defend the rights of Muslims. As we found in Habasha, the Christian Negus, the king there. But we find that in every corner of the world, that you do have, as you gave examples earlier on in one of our earlier episodes, that sometimes even during conflict you find non-Muslims who will protect Muslims from hostile others. So when it says they will never be satisfied with you, what exactly is this verse talking about? Because that interpretation seems to conflict with reality. What does it mean?
Now the verse is وَلَن تَرْضَى عَنْكَ الْيَهُودُ وَلَا النَّصَارَى حَتَّى تَتَّبِعَ مِلَّتَهُمْ. The Jew and the Christian will never be satisfied with you until you follow their way. Now there are sort of these verses in Quran that they come in form, but the context dictates that they're actually specific.
Meaning?
Means general.
Okay, so they sound as if it's general to all. Yeah. But it's understood actually more specifically.
Being specific to a context. This is the nature of Arabic language. And you have a number of verses like this in Quran. Like in Baqarah, earlier Allah said, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا سَوَاءٌ عَلَيْهِمْ أَأَنذَرْتَهُمْ أَمْ لَمْ تُنذِرْهُمْ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. It comes in form of Verily those who deny the truth, the disbelievers. It is same to them, whether you warn them or you don't warn them, they will never believe. But this verse is not to be understood to mean all alladhina kafaru. It's actually a particular group that Allah is referring to, which is understood by the contemporaries of the prophets, and nobody had problem. So same thing with this one. It came in form of walakin yuradu bihi al-khas. What is meant is actually a group. So this is number one, is contextual. Number two, like Imam Ibn Kathir actually reported from Qatada, a Sahabi of the Prophets, he said the verse actually relates to a time when a group of Christians came to the Prophet ﷺ for a dialogue. Okay? And because they are not comfortable, they didn't agree on some terms, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just telling them that, look, lan tarda anka al-yahud wa lan nasara. Okay, they will never be comfortable, they will never follow your way if you don't get to their terms. So it's not saying that they will never believe. Maybe a particular group the Prophet ﷺ was discussing with, Allah said this is the nature. But of course, like you said earlier, we continue seeing Jews and Christians understanding Islam, getting convinced with Islam and accepting Islam. Because the verse is not in its entirety saying they will never. No, but it was a particular context that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala meant by that.
So this is where the sababun nuzul, the occasion of the revelation, the context, helps us understand the specific nature, and as opposed to the interpretation some take to generalize it. Malam Muhammad, what would you add?
Yeah, I will quickly add some verses that shows that they are not same. There are those who will understand with you and even side with you, and there are those who will not. There are those who are good among them who will live peacefully, and those who will not. For instance, Allah Ta'ala speak about some of them, that you don't just generalize or stereotype them, all of them. He said in a verse, there are those who are upright and in fact in devotion to God, day and night. And again, in another verse, Allah Ta'ala also talked about them, where he's talking about their trustworthiness. He said, Min ahli kitabi, man inta amanhu bi kintarin, yu'addihi ilayk, wa minhum man inta amanhu bi dinarin, la yu'addihi illa ma dumta alayhi qa'ima. Among them are those who are trustworthy, that if you give them a treasure to keep, they would give it to you the way you have given them. And there are those who, if you give them a penny to hold for you, in fact, you have to struggle to get it out of them. So they are not the same. And like Mali Ibrahim said, these verses sometimes are contextual, that you need to be sure who was it addressing and how was it revealed. Like the verse he quoted, Inna alladhina kafaru sawa'un alayhim anzartahum am lam tunzirhum la yu'minun. So if by this verse, if we look at the general meaning, we just say then there is no need preaching. There is no need saying anything, and there would not even be need of sending messengers anymore after people carrying the message of messengers, because he said it is the same whether you warn, you preach, or you don't, they will never believe. So that means that is the end. It's just like what Allah told Noah when the end of time for his people came. He said, okay, nobody among your people again are going to be, except those who have believed. So that means the end has come, and then flood was used to destroy those who did not believe. That was the end. So it does that mean the same thing with the Ummah of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, that nobody, and like I have said in some certain episodes that we had here, Islam is a religion because it's ordained by God, who knows future. Once it speaks for now until eternity. So Allah knew, even after revelation of this, because this is in Baqarah, so Baqarah was revealed a bit earlier than other verses, and other people embrace Islam until the end of the life of Prophet ﷺ. People embrace Islam people are still embracing Islam today. So it's not true. And you have in practice, in reality, people who today, up till today, you will see them that they will understand with you, they will stand by you, and they are not Muslim, they are non-Muslims. So we will Quran is never contradicted by anything, whether any reality. And if this is the reality that is done, then that means that was not the intent of the Quran. Then we need to understand the Quran in its real context. We should also know that, like I've said, people existed with different character disposition. We have people who have shown hatred, and we have people who have shown love. Najashi, like you mentioned, showed love, acceptance, accommodation. We will have the Meccans, like Abu Jahl, who have shown hatred, and the rest of them we have among the Christians who have, and even when in the recent past, the Crusaders, how they have dealt with the Muslims, and they have killed a lot of Muslims
and
the
some
Jews,
Christians
yes,
also.
yes.
Yeah.
But now you again within the same Christianity, you have people who have understood, are even embracing Islam. So it does not mean that all of them are the same. So we will need to apply every verse in its context, and we'll look at it based on individual and communal level. This individual has he shown that level of trust, acceptance, and cooperation that we can work together? Yes. From all that is evident to me, yes. Then Islam said, continue relating with the person. And this person showed me, deceived me enough, and has betrayed my trust enough. No, then you avoid that person. And this is across the divide. Even among the Muslims, if you find people like this, it's not because they are Muslim you continue to relate with them. No, you severe, And the final thing I will say is, if you say, lantarda, therefore, no relationship, then how do you invite them to the way of the Lord? How do you invite them? Because we know, and it is reflected in the history of Islam, that character and interpersonal relation with people convince people to accept your way. Like they said, action speaks more than 1,000 words. Yes. So if your actions, your character disposition is convincing, you don't need to say this is, the only thing is, like somebody will say that he found a child that picked a lost property, it's an amount of money, and returned it to the head of the principal of the school. And the principal is a Muslim child. The principal came and was saying, what a good child. And the child said, I did this because my mother told me that in Islam, once you pick anything that is not yours, return it to people who will announce, and I know you are the authority, so I brought it to you. So this is a teaching that Islam has taught me, and my mother told me that this is the position of Islam. So now that's a message. It's not, the child did not preach too long, but this action has shown that if there is no this interaction, how would you, and the principal happens not to be a Muslim, but of course that's act of that child earned him the most respected and the most trustworthy of the student, that in fact until he left the school, that respect was there for him. So this is what we should do as Muslims. Let our character disposition show, and let's not avoid people unless they have shown that level of mistrust or enmity, open one, that we can no longer tolerate, and there is no way we can change them. We have made our effort to change, but we couldn't. Then we allow them be who they are.
Good. And I think what your responses help in exemplifying is the need to be very careful about taking verses of the Quran and reaching very grandiose conclusions that conflict with so many things, have serious implications, without the prerequisite scholarship. The need to be very careful about simplistic interpretations, especially when you're also just going with the English translation, depending on which translation you have. Some say don't take them as friends, and you say, well, the Quran says don't take them as friends, whereas, as you are saying, there's a nuance to the meaning of awliya in these verses. The need to look at how was this verse put in practice in the time of the Prophet and in the lives of the companions. How did classical scholars understand? So the need for this triangulation by looking at it from the side of the hadith, also from the side of the seerah, the prophetic biography, from the side of how scholars looked at it, in such a way that, so the need to look at it in such a way that there is no contradiction, there's a harmonizing, because any conclusion that is the product of harmonizing the evidence is considered more authoritative than one that leaves you with conflicting evidence when, all the evidence is solid. I'd like to thank you both for your contributions to this discussion, the clarification of these verses. Inshallah, until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.